She was just 16, tied to a barbed wire fence like a wild animal, left bleeding, starving, and silent in the middle of nowhere. Her wrists were raw, her lips cracked. No one came. No one heard. She had no name, no home, and no hope, until a lonely old rancher stumbled upon her while driving home one dusty evening. He thought he was rescuing a broken girl, but what he uncovered was a secret so horrifying, so deeply buried, it would shatter everything he thought he knew about her and about his own land. What was she running from? Who left her there? And why did her first whispered words make him freeze in terror? This isn't just a story of rescue. It's a story of survival, betrayal, and a darkness that refused to stay hidden. Watch till the very end, because the truth she carried would change lives and cost others everything. The wind howled across the open prairie as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows over the endless stretch of ranch land. Dust swirled in the air, dancing with the dying light, while the creaking of an old windmill was the only sound that broke the silence. Jackson Cole, a rugged rancher in his late 50s, had lived alone for years, surrounded only by cattle, creaking fences, and the weight of old regrets. His life moved in quiet circles, up at dawn, work the land, tend the animals, eat in silence, sleep under the stars. He didn't need anyone, or so he thought. That evening, as he returned from the far edge of his property, something caught his eye along the wire fence that bordered the road. At first, he thought it was a pile of old cloth tangled in the posts. But then it moved. He stopped his truck with a sudden screech and jumped out, boots thudding against the dry dirt. His heartbeat pounded like a drum. As he got closer, the shape became clear, a girl, tied to the fence, wrists raw, ankles bruised, head bowed low, hair matted with sweat and dust. She looked no older than 16. Jackson's breath caught in his throat. "Dear God," he whispered, rushing forward. "Hey, can you hear me?" The girl didn't speak. Her body trembled with every breath, her lips cracked and bleeding. Her clothes, what little she had, were torn and filthy. A makeshift rope of wire and cloth held her tightly against the fence post, like an animal left to die. He didn't hesitate. Pulling out his knife, he carefully cut through the bindings, wincing as she whimpered in pain. "It's okay. I've got you," he murmured, trying to sound calm though his hands were shaking. She collapsed into his arms the moment she was free, her body light, fragile, like a sack of bones wrapped in pain. He carried her to the truck, laid her gently on the worn passenger seat, and covered her with his jacket. Her eyes flickered open for just a moment, hollow, terrified, searching. She tried to speak, but only a faint, broken whisper came. "Don't let him find me." Then she passed out. Jackson's mind reeled. Who would do something like this? Who could abandon a child in this way? Tied up, left alone, discarded like trash. As he drove back to his cabin, every bump in the road made the girl moan in her sleep. He kept glancing over, helpless, unsure what to do. He'd never been a father, never even married. People called him the lonely rancher for a reason. He didn't know how to take care of anyone except cows and horses. But in that moment, nothing mattered except getting her to safety. At the cabin, he laid her on the couch by the fireplace, stoked the flames, and wrapped her in blankets. He boiled water, found the cleanest cloths he had, and gently cleaned her wounds. Every bruise told a story of cruelty. Every scar whispered of pain. And yet, there was something else, something hidden beneath the surface. A silence that wasn't just fear. It was like her soul was carrying a weight far heavier than the abuse. That night, Jackson barely slept. He sat in his armchair, shotgun by his side, eyes on the door. He didn't know who had hurt her, but something told him they weren't far. And if they came looking, he'd be ready. The next morning, the girl stirred. She opened her eyes slowly, blinking against the soft light of the fire. Jackson knelt beside her, offering her a cup of warm broth. She took it with trembling hands, sipping slowly, still silent. "My name's Jackson," he said softly. "You're safe now. You don't have to say anything, but if you want to, I'm here." She looked at him for a long moment. Then she whispered, "I'm Emily." It was the first thread of a story that would soon unravel a nightmare. As the days passed, Emily started to speak, slowly, cautiously, like each word might cost her something. She didn't say much at first, but Jackson listened, always listened, and what he began to piece together chilled him to the core. Emily hadn't just been abandoned. She had been hunted. Her father, a name she could barely say without trembling, wasn't just cruel. He was dangerous, a man with a past steeped in violence, a shadow that stretched beyond the boundaries of the ranch, touching places Jackson had tried to forget. He had ties to things Jackson had seen once, long ago, dark, silent things that lived in the corners of rural America. Emily had been trying to escape him, but he had caught her, dragged her back, and tied her to that fence as punishment for running. He hadn't planned to come back for her. Jackson's heart ached in ways he didn't know were possible. She was just a child who had never been protected, never truly loved, never given the chance to be more than someone's property. He'd taken and injured animals before, nursed them back to health, but this was different. Emily wasn't a stray. She was a soul on the edge of breaking. One evening, as they sat by the fire, Emily asked, "Why did you stop that night? You didn't even know me." Jackson stared into the flames. "Because no one else would have." Then he added, almost to himself, "And maybe I needed saving too." That was the moment something shifted. He began to see her not as a burden, but as a purpose. Someone he had been meant to find. And Emily, she started to trust him, bit by bit, like thawing ice. But deep in her eyes, something still lingered. A fear that hadn't left. A secret she hadn't told. Something worse than anything she'd revealed so far. Jackson didn't push, but he felt it coming. Like a storm building on the horizon. What Emily hadn't yet told him would shake everything he thought he knew about her father, and about the ranch he thought was his refuge. Because buried in her silence was a secret tied not just to her past, but to his own. And the real story was only beginning. Jackson couldn't shake the feeling that Emily was holding something back. In her voice, there was always a hesitation. In her eyes, a shadow too deep for someone so young. He didn't push her. He knew wounds like hers didn't heal with questions. But the unease gnawed at him. Something inside her hadn't been said. And whatever it was heavier than everything else she had already shared. The days passed slowly. Emily began to help around the ranch in small ways. Brushing the horses, feeding the chickens, watching Jackson with the quiet attentiveness. Her steps grew steadier, her voice a little stronger. But her nights told a different story. Jackson would often hear her crying in her sleep, or jolting awake with a scream she quickly muffled with her hand. He'd sit outside her room in the dark, shotgun across his lap, listening to the silence settle again. Then, one morning, everything shifted. Jackson found her in the barn, standing still as stone, staring at something in the hay. He walked over slowly. "Emily, what is it?" She didn't answer. Her hand was trembling, pointing to a small, metal tag buried in the straw. Jackson picked it up. It was rusted, bent, but one thing was clear: a number. A serial number. It wasn't from his ranch. It didn't belong to any animal he owned. Emily turned away, tears filling her eyes. "It's his," she whispered. "He's been here." Jackson froze. "What do you mean?" She looked at him, face pale, lips quivering. He used to use tags like that. On things that weren't animals. On people. Girls. The air went cold. Jackson tightened his grip on the tag. "Are you saying he's been here? On this property?" She nodded slowly. "He marks things he plans to come back for. It's a warning. A promise." Jackson's chest tightened. He looked around the barn, every shadow now suspicious. The idea that someone had been on his land, his sanctuary, watching, planning, waiting. It sent a cold rage through his veins. "Why didn't you tell me this before?" Emily's voice broke. "Because I didn't want you to send me away. Because if he finds out I told you, he'll kill us both." Jackson stepped closer, his voice low but firm. "You're not going anywhere. Not while I'm breathing. And no man's gonna lay a hand on you again. Not here." But as brave as he sounded, inside he was unraveling. Who was this man? What kind of monster brands human beings like cattle? And how had Emily managed to escape him alive? Later that day, Emily finally began to talk, really talk. She sat at the table, hands wrapped around a chipped mug of tea, eyes staring into the steam as if the truth were hiding inside it. "He wasn't just my father," she said quietly. "He was something else. Something worse." Jackson sat across from her, silent, patient. "He kept us out in the woods. Me, my sister, and a few others. Always moving. Always hiding. He said the world was full of evil, and only he could protect us. But we weren't safe. Not from him. He hurt us. Starved us. Tied us up like animals. Sometimes for days. Said it was punishment. Said it was love." Jackson clenched his fists beneath the table. Emily continued, voice shaking. "The tags, they meant you belonged to him. And if someone tried to run, he'd find them, mark them again. Or worse. Where's your sister now?" Jackson asked. Emily swallowed hard. "Gone. Last year. He said she got sick. But I heard her screaming. Then nothing. After that, I started planning. Took months. I waited until he was drunk, stole the keys, and ran. But he caught me. Dragged me back. Said if I ran again, I'd be left like the others. I didn't think he meant it literally. Until that night, he tied me to the fence." Jackson felt like the floor had shifted beneath him. All this time, he'd thought he was helping a girl escape from a cruel father. But this wasn't a case of abuse. It was something deeper, darker, something closer to a cult than a family. He knew he couldn't handle this alone anymore. That night, after Emily had gone to bed, he opened the old wooden chest he hadn't touched in years. Inside were faded documents, a dusty badge, and a revolver he thought he'd never use again. Before he was a rancher, Jackson had been a sheriff, a good one. But one case had gone too far, cost too much, and he'd walked away. Now, it felt like that old part of him was waking up. He made a few calls. Old contacts. Quiet voices. People he trusted. They all told him the same thing. Stay out of it. Men like that don't go quietly. They vanish. Reappear. Leave bodies behind. But Jackson didn't care. Emily was worth more than silence. The next morning, he started fortifying the ranch, fixed the locks, set traps near the fence line, taught Emily how to shoot. She was reluctant at first, but he insisted. "If he comes, you'll need to defend yourself." But even with all the precautions, the dread kept building. The tag in the barn wasn't a threat. It was a warning, and Jackson knew what it meant. Emily was being hunted, and somewhere out there, her father was watching, waiting for the right moment to strike. Then, 3 nights later, it happened. Just after midnight, Jackson heard the sound, a low crunching of gravel outside the window. He grabbed his rifle and moved to the door, heart pounding. Emily was already awake, standing behind him, eyes wide. They stepped out into the dark together. At the edge of the property, just beyond the barn, a figure stood. Tall, still, watching. Jackson raised the rifle. "Get off my land," he shouted. The figure didn't move. Emily gasped. "That's him." And in that moment, Jackson realized the storm had finally arrived. But he had no idea just how deep this man's reach went, or what secret Emily was still too afraid to say. The worst was still to come. Jackson's finger hovered near the trigger as the figure at the edge of the barn stood still, shrouded in shadow. The silence between them was suffocating, as if the earth itself had stopped to listen. Emily clung to the porch railing, frozen, her eyes locked on the man who had once called himself her father. The air was thick with dread, and even the crickets had gone quiet. Then the figure spoke. His voice was calm, low, almost too casual. "You got something that belongs to me." Jackson's grip tightened. "She doesn't belong to anyone." The man chuckled darkly. "That's where you're wrong. I raised her, fed her, trained her. That girl is mine." Emily took a step forward, her voice barely louder than a whisper. "You killed my sister." The man didn't flinch. She was weak, couldn't follow rules. "You, on the other hand, you had potential. Still do." Jackson moved between them. "If you take one more step, you'll leave this place in a body bag." But the man didn't move closer. Instead, he slowly raised his hands and said, "I'm not here to fight. I just came to remind her of what she is. She's marked. Always will be." He turned and disappeared into the darkness as quickly as he had appeared. Jackson stood there, rifle ready, heart thundering in his chest. He waited, listened, watched the shadows. But the man was gone. Back inside, Emily sat silently by the fire, her face pale and distant. Jackson paced the floor, every instinct screaming at him to act. "We need to call the sheriff," he said. "You need protection. We need to end this." But Emily just shook her head. "You don't understand. He's not working alone." Jackson stopped. "What?" She looked up at him, her eyes brimming with the secret she had kept buried. "There's more. A group." He called it the Binding Circle. "It's not just him. There are others. Men, women, some in law enforcement, some in churches. They take girls, raise them like livestock, brand them, break them, sell them." Jackson's stomach turned. "He used to bring men to the woods," Emily continued. "They watched us like animals in cages. Some of them paid to take girls. Others just watched. He said I was special, that I was meant to lead one day. I think that's why he let me live. But when I ran, I think I ruined something big, something they were planning." Jackson sat down slowly, staring at the fire. He had heard rumors like this before, back when he wore the badge. But he never saw enough to prove it. Whispers, vanished girls, officials who turned a blind eye. But this wasn't rumor anymore. It was in his home, sitting across from him, breathing. "Why me?" he finally asked. "Why my ranch?" Emily's answer was like a slap to the soul. "Because your ranch used to be one of their meeting spots." Jackson's head snapped up. "What? Decades ago, before you bought it." He said this land was sacred to them, hidden, safe. They buried things here, did rituals, said no one would ever find them because the land knew how to keep secrets. When I told him where I escaped to, he laughed. He said I led him right back to the beginning. Jackson felt the weight of those words like stones on his chest. His sanctuary had never been clean. It had roots in something evil, and now it was all rising to the surface. The next day, Jackson started digging, literally. He walked the property with a shovel and a map Emily had drawn from memory. Behind the barn, near an old, crooked tree, he hit something hard. Metal. He dropped to his knees and pulled at the dirt until a rusted box emerged. Inside were photographs, grainy, old, but horrifying. Girls, chained, gagged, tagged, some faces too young to comprehend. Alongside the photos were pages of names, symbols, payment logs, evidence. Unmistakable. Jackson's hands shook as he held the box. His stomach turned. This wasn't just a personal fight anymore. It was a mission. He brought the box inside, locked the doors, and made a call. Not to the local sheriff. He couldn't trust anyone now. Instead, he called a former FBI contact, a man who owed him a favor. Within hours, wheels were turning. Quietly, carefully. But they were too late. That night, the ranch was set on fire. Jackson woke to the sound of crackling flames, and Emily screaming his name. The barn was already engulfed. Horses cried out in panic. Smoke filled the sky. Jackson grabbed the shotgun, burst out the door, and fired 2 warning shots. Shapes moved in the shadows. 3 men, dressed in black, running back toward the tree line. One turned and aimed. Jackson fired first. The man dropped. By the time firefighters arrived, half the ranch was gone. But Jackson had saved the box. And Emily. The next day, federal agents arrived in unmarked vehicles. Emily gave her full statement. Jackson handed over the evidence. What followed was a multi-state investigation. Raids, arrests, hidden compounds unearthed. Emily's father, real name Marcus Lyle, was caught trying to flee the country. He resisted. He didn't survive. But even in death, he didn't take all the evil with him. The group, though shaken, wasn't fully destroyed. Some members vanished. Others walked free on technicalities. The system wasn't perfect. Emily, however, was finally free. Months passed. The ranch slowly rebuilt. Emily stayed. Not because she had to, but because she chose to. Jackson never pushed her to leave. He offered her space, safety, and something she'd never had before, unconditional love. And for Jackson, the lonely rancher who once believed his life had no more purpose, everything changed. He wasn't alone anymore. He wasn't just a man tending cattle. He was a protector, a survivor, a father. One evening, Emily stood on the porch, watching the sun dip low over the fields. Jackson joined her, 2 mugs of tea in hand. "You ever think it'll all be over?" she asked softly. Jackson looked out at the land, now peaceful, quiet, honest. "I don't know," he said, "but I know this. He tied you like an animal, but you didn't break. You endured. You lived. And now you're free." She nodded, eyes glistening. And together, they watched the light rise again. The months that followed were not easy. Emily had escaped a nightmare, but healing from it was a war of its own. Some days, she barely spoke. Others, she wandered the ranch in silence, staring at the fields as if trying to rewrite the memories burned into her soul. But through it all, Jackson stayed. He didn't push her to smile, didn't force her to forget. He simply stayed, quiet, steady, present. One morning, after a long winter, Emily came out of the cabin wearing boots too big and a faded hat Jackson had left for her. She walked straight to the stables and began brushing down the horses. Jackson watched from a distance, his heart full. It wasn't about chores. It was about reclaiming something: control, trust, normalcy, a life. Later that evening, as the sun fell behind the hills, Emily sat by the fire and held something in her hands, one of the tags her father had used. She turned it slowly between her fingers, then tossed it into the flames. It hissed, twisted, and melted into nothing. "That name, that mark, it's gone now," she whispered. Jackson nodded, his voice rough. "That's right. He doesn't own a single part of you anymore." Tears welled in her eyes, but she didn't look away. "I thought no one would ever see me as more than what he made me." "I do," Jackson said gently. "You're not broken, Emily. You're brave. You're still here." She leaned into him then, not like a victim seeking rescue, but like someone finally safe. In the weeks that followed, the ranch became a place of new beginnings. A few families who had also escaped similar horrors reached out. Jackson opened his gates. Emily helped them settle in. She spoke to the girls, not with pity, but with power. Her voice was soft, but her words carried weight, because she understood. The land that once hid darkness now became a sanctuary, a place of light. On the anniversary of her escape, Jackson found Emily sitting alone beneath the old crooked tree where the box of secrets had once been buried. She looked up as he approached, her face calm, peaceful. "You okay?" he asked. She nodded. "I'm not scared anymore." He sat beside her, the breeze warm and quiet. "He tried to define me by pain," she said, "but you showed me that kindness can be louder than cruelty." Jackson didn't speak. He just placed his hand gently over hers. For the first time in a long time, Emily smiled. The man who left her tied like an animal tried to silence her forever. But in the end, it was her voice and a lonely rancher's quiet kindness that rewrote the story. And this time, it ended with hope.